LAM 470.
A jet plummets from the sky in Namibia, killing everyone on board.
I have never seen an airplane this destroyed.
The wreckage gives investigators their first big clue.
Definitely made by the engines.
There were two depressions at the very beginning of the debris trail.
The plane was level. Maybe they were trying to land.
But when investigators listen to the cockpit voice recorder,
Something's going on in that car. Turn it up.
some strange sounds point to a disturbing possibility.
What the hell?
Maputo International Airport in Mozambique.
Auto brakes at TRO. Auto brakes are set. Confirm takeoff configuration. Takeoff configuration number. Ready for takeoff. LAM 470, ready for takeoff.
LAM 470, you are cleared for takeoff.
Roger, Maputo Tower, LAM 470. Here we go. Positive grade. 0. 0.
49-year-old Captain Herminio dos Santos Fernandez commands LAM Mozambique Airlines Flight 470. He's one of the airline's most experienced pilots.
Flap set to 0. Flap set to 0.
The first officer is 24 and at the beginning of his career.
This crew pairing with an experienced, middle-aged Mozambican captain and a younger co-pilot, this is an average, normal pairing.
Autopilot on. Autopilot on.
It takes 20 minutes for the flight to level off at its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet.
Disaster strike.
Angola, and will fly over South Africa and Botswana to get there. The flight will take 4 hours.
LAM Mozambique has been in existence for quite some years, actually. The late 1930s, it started operations. So it's a well-established airline. Flies mostly within Africa, with a fairly small fleet of around 6-7 aircraft.
The direct flight from Mozambique to Angola is a crucial connection for many passengers.
Those two countries are both Portuguese-speaking, and they have lots of business links. There's a great mix of tourists, of business people, traveling between the two countries, specifically because of this Portuguese link.
The workload should be fairly light for the cabin crew. Today's flight is undersold. Most seats are empty. The pilots are flying a recent addition to the airline's fleet. It's an Embraer 190, purchased just over a year ago. The twin-engine jet is in use all around the world, largely on low-volume routes.
The Embraer 190 is a modern aircraft, very successful. It's considered a regional jet. It is a good aircraft to fly.
Gaborone area control, LAM 470.
45 minutes after takeoff, the jet crosses into the airspace over Botswana. The pilots check in with the Gaborone Area Control Center.
Whether you're flying across a country or across several countries, you have to go through several jurisdictions. So on a typical long-distance flight, you may have 3 or 4 different distinct air traffic control areas where the airplane has to communicate with.
LAM 470 Gaborone.
Report your estimated time to Accra.
About that. Gaborone, LAM 470. Copy that. You should be at Agram at 10:20. We'll report back then.
The pilots confirm that they will check in when they reach a navigational point that marks the boundary between Botswana and Angola.
Disaster strike.
It's been an hour since the controller in Gaborone last communicated with LAM 470. The flight should be approaching Angola, so he gives the crew their next instructions.
LAM 470 Gaborone. Please continue with Luanda control, frequency 8888.
Nope, not today.
LAM 470, do you copy?
Not today.
But there's no reply. 5 minutes later, the Gaborone controller contacts Luanda Control in Angola to find out if they've heard from the crew.
I'm looking for LAM 470. Are you in contact?
It was intended to be handed off to Angola to Luanda. Handoff never happened. Luanda called back and said the airplane's not here.
5 minutes before its expected arrival time, LAM 470 has still not contacted Luanda Control.
You haven't heard anything?
Neither controller knows where LAM 470 is. It has disappeared. There are no distress calls or any signals from the plane's emergency locator transmitter. Investigative agencies from the 3 countries where the plane could be are notified: Botswana, Angola, and Namibia.
Last contact was at 9:19 a.m. Let's start there.
Investigators from each country check their recorded radar signals to see if they can trace the missing Embraer 190. It's the Namibians who find its track.
There it is.
Members of Namibia's Directorate of Aircraft Accident Investigation, or DAAI, review its recorded signal.
The Namibians had the radar information, showed him at cruise, and then all the way till he disappeared off of the signal, off of the radar.
Okay, here we go. Starting to descend.
The data shows that Flight 470 was cruising normally at 38,000 feet. Then, it began to plunge towards the ground at a breathtaking speed.
It's traveling really fast.
They watched the signal for 6 minutes. It shows the plane falling more than 30,000 feet.
Tracking over twice the normal descent rate. That's it. Let's go.
It was clear that the aircraft was at cruise and disappeared from radar some thousands of feet above ground, consistent with the aircraft either attempting to land or the aircraft having some other difficulty.
The radar track disappears once the plane drops below 6,600 feet. But it does show that just a few kilometers from the border between Botswana and Namibia, LAM 470 was rapidly heading towards the ground.
Yeah, we're checking for airports in the area now. I don't see any airports near their last known location.
Investigators hope the pilots were able to land at an airfield.
This aircraft had an emergency where they were unable to communicate with the outside world, or they were too busy keeping the airplane in the sky to communicate, and they were maybe trying to land, either at an airstrip in the area or, worst case, an emergency landing away from the airport.
The 6 minutes that passed from the time LAM 470 began its descent to the time it disappeared from radar should have been enough time for pilots to call in an emergency. The question is, why didn't they? Search and rescue aircraft deploy to try and find Mozambique Airlines Flight 470. But it's park rangers in Namibia's remote Wabwata National Park who first come across a tangle of wreckage. It's clearly Mozambique Airlines Flight 470. All 27 passengers and the flight crew are dead.
The area where the aircraft wreckage was found in the end, it's a very remote area, it's sparsely populated, and it's a very open area.
The site is in a roughly 280-mile strip of Namibia, straddling Botswana and Angola, putting the investigators from Namibia's DAAI in charge.
Okay. Got a lot of ground to cover. Let's find the point of impact.
This was the biggest investigation they've ever had. It was the first one involving a fatality on a large jet transport. It was an aircraft that was from outside the country, with passengers on board from several other countries. So they were under the extra pressure of having an international spotlight.
I have never seen an airplane this destroyed.
The team combs through the debris for any clues that could help explain the crash.
The debris can tell us a lot. Just the way that the debris is reflected on the ground is very important.
The last radar plot of the flight showed the plane was in an unusually steep descent moments before the crash. But the crash site adds important details.
If the plane came down there, it was headed in this direction, towards the Luanda.
Flight 470 was headed in the direction of its destination. It was not off course. Investigators look for other wreckage patterns to see what else they can learn.
Right aileron. Take note.
One of the things that the investigators are looking for is to see if very specific parts of the aircraft are in or near the major debris field, such as the tip of the wings, nose of the aircraft, the tail of the aircraft.
Not flat.
These parts of the aircraft tend to come off the airplane first if there's an in-flight breakup. They did find all those parts of the airplane. The aircraft was completely intact when it hit the ground.
At the point of initial impact, investigators find two nearly identical pits.
Let's get a measurement.
There were two depressions at the very beginning of the debris trail.
$32 feet. That's the distance between the two engines.
They had a distance between them that was roughly the distance between the engines of the aircraft.
Identical. So the plane was level.
That implied to the investigators that the aircraft was relatively wings level.
It's an important lead that shows the investigators the way in which the plane hit the ground. Investigators study the actual shape of the crash site.
Okay, we're 487 meters from the first point of impact.
The wreckage pattern is long and narrow.
When I see a wreckage trail that's that long and the aircraft is that disintegrated, it says that there was both a high vertical speed as it hit the ground and a high forward speed to allow the wreckage to spread over such a wide area. That usually indicates that there was a very high speed, not necessarily an out of control high speed impact with the ground.
The extensive trail of debris suggests one possibility.
Maybe they were trying to land.
To answer that question, the team examines the landing gear.
Tires are blown. Damage to the treads. No puncture marks. They were retracted. This wasn't an emergency landing.
It's the first tangible clue about what the pilots may have been doing.
The crew decided not to deploy the landing gear, either because they were unwilling to do so or unable to do so.
They weren't trying to land. Why were they coming in so fast?
A day after the crash, there is still no evidence why LAM-470 flew into the ground in Namibia. The hope is the plane's black boxes will help solve that mystery.
The handling of the flight recorders has to be painstaking, methodical, and has to be done with experience. Because you don't want to do anything that will either ruin or damage the data itself.
The black boxes on board Flight 470 were damaged at impact. They're sent away for analysis. Soon after, the American NTSB, or National Transportation Safety Board, joins the investigation.
Anything missing? Don't think so.
They send veteran investigator Dennis Jones to Namibia.
There weren't many large pieces left. It's mostly all these small pieces that we found scattered all over the crash site.
He's investigated air accidents throughout Africa since 1996.
And they weren't trying to land? No. There was no evidence of an emergency landing. Show me what else you got.
I was very impressed with the Namibian investigator. They set up the scene very, very well. And the crash, like I said, to a very chaotic.
It came in at a low angle, so we think that the pilot had control.
Any signs of in-flight fire?
No. The soot patterns indicating fire was post-crash.
It seemed like whatever fire damage was associated with the impact, and not anything that was in-flight related.
Jones has worked dozens of plane crashes, but even he's baffled by the evidence from the crash site.
Almost no crater at all.
There was no big crater in the ground. So that suggested to me that there was some sense of controllability.
This is a puzzling clue. If the pilots had control of the Embraer, why did it crash?
We were not ruling anything out. It's just that, okay, what should we rule in? We may have missed something. Maybe we overlooked something.
The wreckage and the radar data tell investigators of the LAM Flight 470 crash the same story.
It became quite apparent that it was high energy impact because the craft had essentially disintegrated on impact.
With such a rapid descent, investigators wonder if engine failure was to blame. When a jet engine is running, the rotors spin as they draw in air.
The
Wait if these turbine blades are damaged. They were definitely spinning on impact.
When you take engine just rotating at thousands of revolutions per minute and come to a sudden stop, it tends to have certain kind of signatures, as we call it, corn cobbing, where the rotors themselves will get stripped and it causes the blades to just separate and flatten. It looks like a corn cob. You know, I get that both engines. The air was very strong. They were operating at the time. Like that.
1 week after the crash of Flight 470,
French.
investigators have learned all they can from the crash site. They now need to turn their focus elsewhere for answers.
So, what have we missed?
When I left the scene, I said, okay, we have some answers with the machine. We don't have them all. We may have missed something.
Let's look at the maintenance records.
Maybe it was a mechanical issue that was kind of subtle and perhaps not very obvious at the time.
The investigation moves from the field to DAAI offices in Windhoek, Namibia.
Is this the last inspection?
Looks like it.
They begin looking into the way Mozambique Airlines was maintaining the plane.
November 28th.
Day before the accident.
It seems to be done by the book.
The Embraer 190, purchased brand new just a year ago, has a spotless record.
The maintenance records of his aircraft were excellent. It was well maintained by Mozambique.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the aircraft.
There were no major system failures that had been repaired recently. No deferred maintenance that would have affected any major system. It in fact had a fairly intense inspection, roughly a day before the event.
Here we go.
Nothing that said that the airplane itself was anything other than in top shape when it took off.
With no evidence of a mechanical problem, the team turns its attention to outside factors. They review meteorological reports from the day of the crash.
Alright, Dennis. The guy from Mon weather station is in.
Did bad weather bring down Flight 470?
Great. Why don't we start from the takeoff from Abuja? Africa is the home to some of the most fiercest and strongest thunderstorms. A thunderstorm has every hazard we can imagine along with it. It has electrical discharge and lightning that can affect your navigational systems. It has severe turbulence that can compromise the integrity of the aircraft. It has hail. It has rain.
The team scrolls through a series of satellite images spanning the duration of the flight.
Just some scattered clouds, 3,000 feet throughout the flight. Nowhere near the cruising altitude.
There wasn't anything in the weather that we became aware of that would explain why this airplane was down on the ground.
What was the wind like?
Nothing stronger than 11 knots. No problem there.
When the environment doesn't have anything that was unusual, when the machine itself seems to be in operation, the area that investigators tend to go to is the operation of the aircraft. That is, were the captain and the first officer working appropriately to execute procedures in the right sequence?
With both the machine and the environment ruled out, investigators have only one more avenue to pursue.
Okay. Let's look into the pilot records.
Were the pilots responsible for the crash of Flight 470? Investigators consider if the pilots of LAM 470 played a role in causing the crash.
Captain Hermenio dos Santos Fernandez.
Born in Mozambique, 49 years old. Here we go.
How familiar was Captain Fernandez with the Embraer 190?
How's it, great? You're up. You're up.
The team scrutinizes his pilot records.
You're trying to see anything that might show degradation of performance of the pilot.
Captain Fernandez was not only well-trained,
2,500 on the Embraer 190.
9,000 flight hours total.
he was a very experienced airman. Malcolm Brenner, an expert in pilot psychology, consulted on the investigation.
Captain had an unblemished record, no accidents, no incidents. He was medically qualified. All his records were up to date.
First officer was young, but had over 1,000 flight hours. The two were a good match.
Yeah. Flap set to 0. Flap set to 0.
It's very common practice to have a very senior captain and a more junior first officer. It enables the first officer to learn, to progress in his career. They should work as a good team.
Investigators have exhausted all available avenues of inquiry and come up empty. The crash remains a mystery.
Any news on the recorders?
Not yet. I'll check in.
2 weeks after the crash, the flight data and cockpit voice recorders are finally ready for analysis in Washington, D.C.
We're eager to see what the recorders had to tell us because the recorders will help us with what the strategy will be for the rest of the investigation.
Okay, we're ready for playback.
Gabriel, area control. LAM 470. LAM 470, Gabriel. What's your estimated time to Abraham? Gabriel, LAM 470. Copy that. You should be at Abraham at 10:20. We'll report back then.
Investigators listen to the recording carefully and hear something that piques their interest.
It was just a routine flight until the first officer excused himself to go to the laboratory.
I'm gonna step out to the toilet. Get your controls. No problem. First officer, leave the cockpit.
Captain confirmed, that's fine, and the first officer left.
From that point on, it was quiet.
Seconds go by. A minute. 6 minutes of near silence on the CPR.
Just sound like normal thing going on.
First officer's coming back.
All of a sudden you hear knocking on the door. There was no response. And then the knocking started becoming more repetitive.
The cockpit door remains locked.
The co-pilot of the flight wants to get back in after the captain is not responding.
During flight, the cockpit door locks automatically. It can be opened from the outside with a code. But the code isn't unlocking the door. And the captain still isn't responding.
Maybe the captain fell asleep. Maybe the captain is a little bit woozy. Maybe if I just hit on the door, things will go back to normal. He'll let me back in.
The recording becomes even more disturbing.
I think we heard the ground proximity warning system saying pull up. That was the first sense that we knew that the airplane was even headed down.
The investigators are stunned.
It's beyond abnormal. This is strange. This is unusual. One does not expect to have a situation where a pilot is refused entry into the cockpit.
Is there something wrong with that?
The knocks that took place, and there's no response to these knocks. And then all of a sudden it comes something up in. What's going on here?
The investigation of the crash of LAM Flight 470 has uncovered a shocking clue.
The first officer was locked out of that cockpit for 6 minutes. Right up until the plane crashes. It sounds like the captain did nothing to avert the crash.
There's an authorized crew member who's trying to get back to his position and isn't being allowed in. That's completely abnormal.
We need to figure out what went on in the cockpit.
The authorized co-pilot of the flight wants to get back in. Why isn't the captain responding?
Go back to the moment the first officer in the cockpit.
The team wants to review the cockpit voice recording more carefully. Did they miss anything the first time?
Let's check for incapacitation.
Subtle incapacitation is a situation where a person appears to be normal, both physically and mentally, but for some reason, they're not performing up to standard.
I'm going to step out telemetry. Get the controls. No problem.
Isolate the captain's mic and turn it off.
They're not thinking straight. They're not moving as quickly or with as much dexterity. One of the kinds of subtle incapacitation that can happen is hypoxia. That is a lack of oxygen.
I can hear him breathing. He can still breathe and be incapacitated. Hold on. Play that again.
Something's going on in that cockpit. The captain's doing something.
And your clicking sounds, I think it was the pilot that was on the flight deck was operating some mechanism. You couldn't tell exactly, but it sounded like rotating the dials, probably associated with the autopilot. But we just can hear clicking sound going on.
He's definitely moving around.
We can hear movement, so there's going to be someone who's conscious.
What's he doing? Including flight commands?
What they didn't hear was even more unusual. They didn't hear a single word coming out of the mouth of the captain. Not a word to the first officer. Not a word on the radio. Not even a word to himself. There was silence on his side.
The recording leads to a grim hypothesis.
Once the investigators heard what was happening, it dawned on them that there was some sort of deliberate action on the part of the captain.
A captain making inputs but not letting his first officer back into the cockpit forces investigators to consider a disturbing possibility. That the captain's actions were deliberate.
You got done.
It seems extremely unlikely that a well-trained, experienced pilot would crash an aircraft deliberately. The team needs to rule out all other possibilities before making that determination.
We knew nothing about the profile of this aircraft, what it was doing. Once you get that information, now you can correlate it with the cockpit voice recorder.
So, can we agree that the FBI...
Oh my god.
Seriously consider deliberate action. I want to make sure all the alternatives really do not come in.
God.
Okay. Now there's pilot action. Let's take a look at what happened after the first officer leaves the cockpit.
The data will show which inputs, if any, the captain made to the flight controls.
Can we isolate these 4 parameters?
The inputs paint a harrowing picture of the captain's actions inside the cockpit.
The first officer leaves the cockpit. A few minutes later, it looks like he starts to make a series of inputs.
I'm going to step out to the toilet. Do you have the controls?
No problem.
Uh-huh.
After the first officer leaves, the altitude is adjusted 3 times, instructing the plane to drop to an altitude of 592 feet above sea level.
That's the clicks we heard.
Feet is well below ground level in that area.
He was flying it on autopilot, which is the way you would normally land an airplane.
3 minutes later, the first officer returns to the cockpit.
But the captain doesn't unlock the door. Instead, he must have overridden the door code.
Planes like the Embraer 190 have a control that allows a pilot inside to override the keypad outside and keep the door locked.
Then, he disengages the auto throttle, starting the descent.
The power was reduced. The throttles remained in the idle position. These same kinds of inputs are what you will be using during a descent to the destination.
He was commanding the aircraft to crash the airplane.
I can't get in.
Let's dial out messages. The first officer tries to be discreet. Captain, are you okay? The last thing he needs now is panic in the cabin.
The first officer pounding on the door. Captain makes one last move. What's the speed brake?
The speed brake raises the plane's spoilers.
before is completely outside normal procedures.
The speed brakes increase the vertical speed of the aircraft. The airplane was descending at about 5,000 feet per minute. Within a minute of deploying those speed brakes, it went up to a maximum of just over 10,000 feet per minute.
During the aircraft's descent, the captain leaves the autopilot engaged and doesn't touch the control column.
The inputs he was making shows that the captain had a very, very thorough knowledge of the aerodynamics of the aircraft, the behavior of the systems, the effect of which was to have a very smooth, very consistent descent from cruise all the way into the ground.
Everything that was being done by the pilot was to the end of bringing the aircraft down fast.
Captain. Captain, open this door.
In less than 15 minutes, Captain Fernandez deliberately takes his plane out of cruising altitude and crashes it into the ground.
This was a deliberate action.
There is now one burning question.
Why would the pilot do this?
Captain Emilio dos Santos Fernandez was a seasoned pilot with one of Africa's best airlines. What made him fly LAM 470 up to 38,000 feet and then crash it into the ground?
What we do know is that it took about 2 minutes until the captain locked the door, and then it took about an additional minute until he initiated the descent. So during that time, you have to assume that he was thinking about life, about whether he'd want to do something like this.
Okay, right. Did you know Captain Fernandez personally?
The investigation digs into the captain's life, current and past.
And did he ever seem depressed?
Despite finding no red flags in his life, investigators discover his private life.
Divorce. God damn it.
Investigators found a number of traumas in the captain's background. He had been separated from his wife for
God.
years, but that divorce proceedings had not gone through.
Heart problems.
His daughter was undergoing heart surgery at that time, which would have been very stressful.
And if that is not trauma,
1 year before, the captain's eldest son had died in a car crash, which was believed to have been suicidal.
It was almost 1 year to the day.
The anniversary of the son's death would have been about the time of this accident, just a few days before. So certainly it would have been on his mind.
Captain Fernandez, pleasure to see you again.
Well, sir, the last thing that happened is not what causes, but it may precipitate, it may essentially spring the trap that has already had all this energy behind it.
Such as understand. It is black. Yes, yes it is.
after the investigation of LAM 470, air safety experts struggle to explain what motivated the captain.
It's really impossible for me to answer what the effect his life circumstances had on his decision at that moment during that flight. It's impossible to know from the evidence we have whether an act that was well before the flight, or whether it was something that happened during the flight.
Determining how to keep such an irrational act from happening again is also a challenge. For many safety reasons, having two people in the cockpit at all times is important. It's called the two-person rule.
Mozambique was ahead of most of the industry. And that started a policy